Yeah, I think this is kind of the thing that I have a black belt in, because to be honest, it's been so many times that I kind of come home from work and I need to go to the workshop and I literally want to cry on the couch and say, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm so done with this. When people saying, hey, it's not going to get finished, why it's taking so long? That's kind of the fire from me. I want to prove that, okay, let me
Prove the haters wrong. Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we're joined by Karel from KS Motorsport. We actually already had Karel on the podcast back in episode 26, and we covered the build of his insane tube-framed Time Attack-based DTM BMW M4. Now, that's a mouthful, I'll admit. This actually started, believe it or not, as a toy car that Karel scanned, imported into CAD, expanded up to a 1-to-1 scale, and then went about routing the molds for his body parts out of foam. This was a pretty insane build, and on top of that, he's added a very extensive Veris engineering designed aero kit. This car is designed around Time Attack competition, and one look at it lets you know that Karel is absolutely serious. However, the first episode that we had him on was almost 2 years ago now, and we wanted to catch up and see how things have been going. And this is really an insight into how a lot of projects go in the real world. It's not all plain sailing. It's not like we just build the car and 3 weeks later it pops out and gets into competition and just goes perfectly smoothly. This is a real world look into the pros, cons, highs and lows of building a car at this level. And Karel's completely honest with us about all of the problems that have cropped up over the time he's been shaking this car down and testing it, and all the changes that have been required. And this is no disrespect to Karel. Again, this is exactly what most of us are going to face. So I think for those of you who are maybe starting your journey with a project car, it's going to give you a bit more insight into what you possibly can expect. It's not all doom and gloom though, because Karel is seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. They're just about to come into the summer season of racing, and he's optimistic that 2025 is going to be the year that this car actually puts in some laps in anger and shows the potential that this insane package has to offer. Before we jump into our chat, for those who are new to the Tuned In podcast, High Performance Academy is an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune EFI, how to construct wiring harnesses. We also cover topics on fabrication, 3D modeling and CAD, race driver education, and data logging, just to name a few. You can find all of our courses at hpacademy.com/courses. All of these courses are delivered in high definition video modules that you can watch from anywhere in the world, provided you've got an internet connection. This means you can learn from the comfort of your own place, and you can learn at your own pace. All of our courses also come with a 60-day no questions asked money back guarantee. So if you purchase them for any reason at all, decide it wasn't quite what you expected, no problem, let us know. We'll give you a full refund. And for podcast listeners, you can also use the coupon code podcast75. That will get you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. We'll put the coupon code in the show notes to make it nice and easy for you to find. Lastly, if you like free stuff, then I've got a great deal for you. We are constantly partnering with some of the biggest names in the aftermarket performance industry to give away some great prizes. You can always find our latest prize at hpacademy.com/giveaway. It might be an aftermarket ECU or dash. It could be some engine components or engine building tools, or just about anything in between. They are great prizes, and we will ship them free of charge to your door if you're the winner. There's no tricks here, no purchase required to get your name into the draw. All right, enough with our introduction. Let's get into our interview now. All right, welcome back to the podcast, Karel. Great to have you on board again. I'm really looking forward to diving into what's happened since we caught up to you last, probably almost 2 years ago. Now, for people who haven't heard our first episode, which I'll reference back to in a moment, can you give us a quick introduction to who you are and where you're from?
Sure. Thanks for having me, and also thanks for the last time. I've kind of been, revisiting the pod we did, and I think the content you do is really good. So thank you for that. So I'm Karel, a Swedish bloke who thought it was a good idea to build a replica of a DTM car in my shed, basically. So that's what I do. I have a full-time job, and then it's basically me and my friends, or 1/2 friends, that has been the car, build the car, of course, with help of the sponsors. So yeah, that's kind of what I do. I don't believe in kids or wives or girlfriends.
It's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I had a relationship with us when I started with the car, but unfortunately it ended. So yeah.
Okay, you're sounding almost a little bit jaded on this build at the moment. We're obviously going to dive into this and what's happened and why. I think, though, from what I know, which we'll obviously expand on as we go through the podcast, this is probably not too dissimilar to a lot of home-built cars, basically projects that are being built in people's garages or sheds. And you sort of go into it with big aspirations, hopes and dreams. And as you get through it, you find that the job often was bigger than you thought. And it always takes longer than you expected as well, and usually costs more money than you expected. So this is, while you're working at a very high level, I think there's a lot of takeaways here for anyone who's building a project car in their shed, no matter what the budget and what the level is. Hey guys, things are changing a little on the HPA YouTube channel. We'll no longer be posting the podcast here. The good news is we'll be starting a brand new dedicated podcast channel for all you fans of the pod that listen in on YouTube. So what are you still doing here? Get over to the new channel and subscribe. We will put a link in the description below. So let's just get a quick overview of the car that you've built. It is an absolute work of art, and we're going to keep this high level because we've already had a previous episode. So we'll get a high level overview here. And if people do want to get the full backstory, they can go back and listen to episode 26, and we'll link to that in the show notes. So yeah, quick overview of the car, Karel.
Yeah, sounds good. And you're spot on. It's by not any means any professional big team here with, unlimited resources. It's literally a dude with ideas and dreams. But shortly about the car, it's basically a replica of an M4 DTM. So it's this class 1 GT car, similar to what you have in Japan nowadays, still racing over there. It's a carbon monocoque, the original one with a silhouette body on it. So the one that I did basically took a toy car, 3D scanned it, enlarged it to 1-to-1 size, did 700 plus hours of CFD design and testing, and then we milled everything out in styrofoam. And then from those, we made glass fiber molds, and in those later on the carbon fiber parts, and then basically putting it over a tube frame chassis.
I think that's one of my favorite parts of this build, that you started this whole project with a toy car. But I mean, it just also shows the power of 3D modeling, scanning, 3D scanning, etc. And then, of course, the ability to then essentially route out a plug for your body molds out of styrofoam. Like this is pretty insane what you've actually managed to do there. All right, as you mentioned there, the DTM cars of that era, they're now basically a GT3 car, as I understand it. It's not a series I follow too closely, but back in that day, it was a carbon fiber monocoque, as you mentioned. It was a control part that ran across the field, and then each of the manufacturers basically put their own body on it so it looked like their car. That's about correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And I think that the difference was the engine types. So back then, they had like a V8 4 liters with like 500 horsepower. But the engines was what I believe still kind of the brands of those. So BMW had a BMW V8, and Mercedes had a Mercedes V8. And even though the latest versions of them, which I think they competed just for 1 year, then went to a straight line 4-cylinder with turbos and like 680 horsepower on some overtake button. But then the carbon monocoque, the transaxle, all of that was same in all cars, basically. So
you've got some control parts to sort of keep costs under.
Correct, yeah.
Sort of some kind of level. Obviously, it's not going to be cheap. And then, some consistency across the field. I'm guessing here, when you went through the construction of your car, carbon fiber monocoque is kind of out of the question. Too hard for someone to make one of these essentially as a one-man band?
I mean, like this. I actually encountered a gentleman which follows me and I follow him back. His nickname on Instagram is Aero Dave. And he does remarkable work I think it's for a customer, but I think he does like a BMW E28 with exactly this setup. And
they actually did get the carbon fiber monocoque.
I know.
We've had Aero Dave on the podcast, and hopefully we can get a link to that episode in the show notes here.
Yeah, please do, because that one I missed. But I have talked with him a couple of times over Instagram, and I know that the carbon monocoque, we talked about it. He mentioned a figure, and then I just closed down the app and continue with my life. So, but I also saw that they actually got hold of the Hewland control gearbox in the end as well. And I think that's a really nice piece, because you have basically all of the pickup points for the control arms and everything. So I think they did. I think that build is going to be like what my dream was, but with higher level of movement, so to speak.
It's me again being annoying, but it's for a good reason. Like I said before, you'll no longer find the podcast here, so do yourself a favor and get over to the new channel. You'll find a link in the description below.
Yeah, I mean, without derailing this particular episode, I mean, there's a lot more resources and a lot more manpower behind that build, just knowing what I know of it. And it's easy to have massive dreams, but you also have to be able to actually construct what you're thinking of. I think there's sort of a certain level of satisfaction comes from being able to have an idea and see it through to fruition in a reasonable time frame. If you're dreaming too big, I mean, nothing wrong necessarily with dreaming too big, but if the project sort of ends up going from what you think is going to take 1 to 2 years to sort of 8 or 10, most people are going to end up losing interest in the project well before it comes to fruition. So ultimately coming back, no carbon fibre monocoque, full tube frame chassis with this carbon fibre body, as we already mentioned. Let's quickly go over the engine as well.
Yeah, so the engine is actually an engine I had on my previous car, but it's a BMW V8. So it's the 4 liter 420 horsepower engine that sits like in the M3 E90 cars, like 2012. And it's quite heavily rebuilt. So we have steel sleeves inside of it. It's a custom crank from a really nice steel made. And it also has, of course, the pistons and the rods. And then it has a daily engineering dry sump kit on it. And that's a really good benefit in this, because the engine is very far back and very low to the ground. So when you lift off the bonnet of the car, you can't actually see the engine because it's so hidden under the windshield, basically. So
this is one of those engines where you don't really want to have to change spark plugs too frequently.
No, I did that just a couple of weeks ago, and I believe I just remembered to myself that it's such a pain to do it. And I actually had issues now of the winter when I started the car, and I was like, why is it not running so good on each cylinder? Because the exhaust temperatures was quite different. So then I started swapping spark plugs left and right, and it was starting doing something. I was like, okay, these spark plugs are gone. They need to be new ones. But that's actually been on the list to figure out, to get it more accessible, because I think you can read quite a lot out of the spark plugs on the car, how it feels. So I think that's something I have addressed now. So now you can change the spark plug. You need to remove the windshield and the dashboard, but it's kind of quick. So
that's one thing I've fallen into the trap of as well when you're building something custom. But no, I haven't built anything quite as custom as what you've done here, but building yourself into a corner from a serviceability standpoint. And the one that sticks in my mind is when we tube framed the front of my Evo drag car. It all looked great until we went to work on it, and we quickly realized that you couldn't remove the gearbox without removing the entire engine as well. And when we were only getting 10 passes out of a clutch, so obviously that meant that the gearbox is coming out of the car every drag meeting, that became an absolute chore. So looking at what you've done now, obviously we've just talked about the spark plugs. Is there any other areas where you've kind of designed the car in a way that makes it very difficult to service?
So how much time do we have?
Okay, so the answer is clearly yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's so many things. Like, as I said, the spark plugs, that's a big issue. It's kind of fixed now, I would say. But then also the engine, you can't really... so you even have to remove the main bolt that sits on the dry sump pulley on the crank. So there's a big Allen bolt in the front. You need to remove that to basically lift out the engine. And also the engine sits on a big aluminum plate, and then it has these kind of bosses that aligns into the tube frame. And you can't lift the engine up if you don't remove the bosses. So you need to wiggle the engine front, wiggle it to the left, then take one boss side on one side, and then the next one, and then you can lift it up. The gearbox, I was always thinking, oh, it's so nice to have drop gears. Then you can actually change it for the specific track. But if I knew what I ended up with, I wouldn't choose this in the end. Maybe I could talk to Albins and make it in a bit different way. Maybe have the drop gear in the back of the gearbox. But for me to change the drop gears today, basically I need to completely remove everything that's connected to gearbox, remove the diffuser of the car, then pull everything backwards. Remove the clutch housing and remove the clutch, all of that, to be able to change drop gear. So, I mean, that's never going to happen.
Okay, this is your final warning. If you're a fan of the podcast, you need to head over and subscribe to our new channel. Do it now. You'll find a link in the description below.
So it's about as far removed from a winter's rear end where you remove a plate, change 2 gears and you're away.
Yeah, no.
Just for those who aren't sort of familiar what we're talking about here, so this is not a conventional longitudinal gearbox. This is actually a transaxle, so you've got a combined differential and your 6-speed paddle shifted transmission all mounted in the rear of the car, correct?
Correct, yeah. And the clutch, flywheel.
And these drop gears essentially are a way of allowing you to change the overall gearing up or down to suit the particular track.
Yeah, exactly. So basically you can't change the gearing inside. I mean, you could in the end, but the drop gear allows you to change the whole range. So if the set ratios for gear 1 to 6 is what it is, but then you can play with that up and down overall. So But I think right now the setup we have is quite good. It's a bit fast on first gear, so it's a bit tricky to drive into the pits and get the kind of start and stop. But then for the tracks later on, then I think it's good. It does 290 kph on 6 gear, 8,500 RPM. So I think it's quite okay.
It's always a challenge picking gear ratios. We've got a Hollinger SG3 paddle shifted gearbox in our Toyota 86 endurance car, and all of our endurance events here in New Zealand are a rolling start. So you come up to the start gantry at about 70 kilometres an hour, holding pace with the other cars, and then the lights go green and you're away. So we selected gearing that worked really well for that. First gear basically goes to about 100 kilometres an hour, 61 mile an hour, and that's great for the rolling start. I'll be in first gear. And then since we've competed in a few events with standing starts, and I can tell you that car is an absolute chore to get off the line in anything resembling a good standing start. So if I had my time again, gearing for a standing start would be dramatically different, but I guess compromises have to be made here. Coming back to the engine, we talked about it being based on a M3 E90 sort of naturally aspirated 4-litre V8, but it is no longer naturally aspirated, correct?
Correct. So it's a setup where I've been partnering with Garrett for some time now, and I always liked their setup of turbochargers because they have quite good data out there online on the turbochargers. You can kind of see what is kind of the compressor map on them, and then try to define a specific turbocharger for your engine. So in the end, I choose to go with twin Garrett turbos on this one, and that preferably, I don't know if I like the setup we did in the end, because everything is kind of left side and right side. So you have this balance between left bank and right bank. Does the turbocharger speed in the same rotational speed, and do you get equal flow distribution to left and right side? It's kind of okay now with some of the tweaks that we did. But the G3770 turbos, which I have 2 of, it's amazing how effective the engine is. Because I was kind of assuming that, okay, 1.5 bars of boost, assume that the engine is somewhat like 400 something naturally aspirated. Maybe it's a little bit more because it's stroked. So say that it's maybe 500 horsepower naturally aspirated. Then I was assuming that, okay, 1 bar is a boost, it's going to double, so it's going to be ish around 1,000 horsepower. But when we put it on the dyno and we actually started to run it, then we saw that it's way more effective. So at 0.82 bars of boost, it's doing something like 50 horsepower on the, I think 937 on the rear wheels or something like that.
Wow. Okay, well, that's always a pleasant surprise. You've got a surprise, but it's in the right direction, correct?
Yeah. It is. So I think the setup is really good. I actually saw now that I made a super big mistake when we did the dyno. Maybe, I don't know if you disclosed that or not, but the torque curve on it was always so nice because it was following quite good. And I was playing around with the boost control in the Motec, and I was like, okay, I don't want a lot of torque on the bottom. But now when I started to put out the car together, then I was like, hey, why is there a missing plug on top of the wastegate? Like there's 2 plugs to hold it down. So you basically put your pressure line on one side, and then on the Turbo Smart wastegate, it goes like a V, and then you have another, and it should be a plug there. And I didn't have that. So we're going back to the dyno also now because the injector was maxed out as well. So
you'll get to have another crack at that.
Yeah. And we did try the car on track like 2 weeks ago with the plug in there, and it wasn't a massive change. It was boasting a little bit more on the bottom, but it wasn't drastic. So I think it's okay.
Okay. In terms of the fuel system, you just mentioned you've got the injectors at the moment maxed out, and it was 937 rear wheel horsepower. What size injectors have you got in it at the moment? What have you maxed out, and sort of where are you going to from here?
So the injectors are right. I believe they're 900. Is it 950 cc maybe that we have on there? I mean, technically, in my opinion, what the calculations have done, they shouldn't really be maxed out. That's the strange thing about it. I think they should be able to cope a little bit more, even though we have E85 and running 4 bars of base pressure. But as I said, we had some issues also with the fuel filters for some time, where they seem to be a bit clogged up. So I'm not sure if do you have the calculations in your head? Am I speaking gibberish here?
I'm just quickly. This is just a back of the napkin calculation. It's definitely not something that is pinpoint accurate, but the way I've always worked is to get a rough, am I in the ballpark? I'll take the injector flow capacity in litres per minute total. So you said 950, let's just round that up to 1,000 cc per cylinder. So that means you've got 8 litres total flow. Multiply that by 200, and that will give you an very approximate flow capability in horsepower. So basically, if you're running on pump gas, this only works for pump gas, you're going to have a fuel system that's capable of about 1,600 horsepower. But you're not there. You are on E85. So basically on E85, we lose the capability. You multiply that by about 0.65, and that'll bring you down to about 1,050 horsepower, and that's engine flywheel horsepower. So you are there or thereabouts. And I mean, like I say, again, just to caveat this, it's not something that is pinpoint accurate, but it's a great back of the napkin idea. Like, am I there or thereabouts? And you can quickly tell if you're out of the ballpark. And to me, that looks like, yeah, you're pretty much maxed out the fuel system. So good job.
Yeah. I think in the end that I was kind of seeing that, and I did also kind of some of these calculations that you did now, and I was like, okay, it should something. I think also something I saw some 1,040 horsepower in the engine, which it should be capable of. So as I said, I think okay, but I mean maybe that's it. It's maxed out, even though the calculations I did was kind of on 3 bars base pressure, where now it was at 4. So but anyways.
Yeah, well, you can always sort of, there's, if people want to look, there's online calculators. If I change my fuel pressure from 3 bar to 4 bar, and I've got a 1,000 cc injector, what is that going to do for my fuel flow? So it's not as simple as we double the pressure, we double the flow. There's a sliding scale there, but yeah, obviously you increase the fuel pressure, there is going to be a gain in fuel flow. And I think I probably just glossed over that. I mentioned 0.65, like everyone's going to know what it is, but because of the Stoichia fuel ratio of pump gas versus E85, in order to basically make the same amount of power, we need more E85 fuel, higher mass of fuel compared to gasoline. So that's where that 0.65 came into play. All right, so let's kind of move forward. There's a whole bunch of information I'm really keen to dive into, but before we go too much further, let's talk about your first shakedown on the track. This is a ground up build. Every single component on the vehicle is bespoke, one off, mostly made by you. This must be sort of both very rewarding, but also a little bit daunting when you get to the track. So what's going through your mind at this point? And what was the sort of the run plan, I guess, for the day? How do you go about shaking down a car like this?
So I don't know if when we spoke last time, if I actually did kind of the first ever rolling test. I can't remember if that was the case or not. But
no, I don't believe it actually moved.
Exactly. So kind of we did the absolute first test, and that was for me I call it a technical shakedown, but I mean, in putting fingers as a quote in the air here, but I think that for me it was kind of, see, can I steer with it? Can I brake it? Can it turn? What does actually happen? And a little bit you get some sort of feeling on how the car behaves. But we took it to a really small track. It's like it's not a go-kart track, but it's a bit bigger. They do drive cars on it, but it's not by any means a quick track. So we did that. Everything was scraping. Everything was close to the ground, and the aero wasn't adjusted. The preload on the spring wasn't set correctly, so the car was rolling massively. So, but the first test we did, we actually unloaded the car, bolted everything on there, and did like 4 hours of running back and forth without any issues. And I was like, okay. So I was actually disappointed by that. You would be, oh, why are you disappointed? But I wanted, because this was also like late end of year, and I was like, okay, good. Now we're gonna get a massive list, which we can fix under the winter. But then there wasn't any list on it. So then I was like, oh, damn it. So I knew that, okay, when we start to run the car a bit harder, then the issues will come. And surely they did. So, but the first technical test we did, that was great success. I didn't see it like that, but we didn't have any issues. And the car felt really good. The steering ratio that we decided on the steering rack was good. Like all bits and pieces was really good.
That's almost unheard of, but is this more, I'm getting the sense that this was more an outcome of this track that you were using being relatively low speed. You weren't really able to push the car as hard as you could on a longer, faster track?
Correct. Yeah. So I think that was kind of maybe a mistake on my side, where I should have probably, go to a track where we would have a bit more speed and more stress on the parts. And surely we did that later on. So we prior to the first test we did, we went to an airfield, and then we started to run a little bit faster. And I think there's a video of that where I have like a GoPro on the chest, and I do like turn around the car, and then I go. And that also didn't show much issues, to be honest. We saw some of the aero parts like weren't sitting, something fell off, and bits and pieces, but still not massively bad issues. But then we went for the first track test, and that's kind of where we saw issues. So the splitter mounting wasn't good enough. We had problems with wheel speeds, which didn't work correctly with the wheel bearings we had. The wing mounting points wasn't firm enough, so the wing was always going basically to a negative angle. Side mirrors didn't sit in place, so side windows was popping open. So it was like literally, okay, wow, this is kind of what I was hoping to get, on the first test. But as I said, we didn't go to fast track, so that was a big mistake, to be honest. We should have went for a bigger track and push it more hard.
Let's sort of talk through some of these issues anyway. So the splitter and wing mounts, I'm assuming that despite all of your calculations, it's just putting more force on these components than you'd expected, and they needed to be beefed up further?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think that also in the end, when we did it in the CAD with the mounting points for the splitter, then it because we didn't have the tube frame chassis in the CAD files, we couldn't really see what the intersections of the connecting fixing points would be. So kind of what the fixing points in the CAD with a solo splitter was looking good and was sufficient. Then when we put it on the car, we said, hey, wait, okay, but the tube frame is actually, it's ending like 1.5 meters where the front of the splitter is. So then you started to need to start reaching out in midair and collecting these bits and pieces. And in the beginning, I was like, okay, but at the end of the tube frame, I would make a big aluminum plate, and from those we would make some brackets. But then all of that was flexing. So then let's add some wires to the mounting front points of the splitter to start it out. But that kind of just, whatever forces we had there went back to the plate, and that plate was moving, even though it was like 12 mil aluminum thick plate.
Wow.
So then we said, okay, but maybe the splitter is a little bit too soft. So let's open it up, cut the splitter open again, put some, foam inside, put some little bit structure, like aluminum structure, where it would make it a bit firmer. And that kind of helped, but still the base problem with this was the plate. And also, so we had the plate, and then I think like a 0.5 meter of aluminum profiles hanging in the air, and then collecting the splitter. But that was still kind of almost close to 1 meter from the front of the splitter.
That's a big lever arm, though. That's I can understand that being problematic to make it truly stiff without it ending up weighing sort of a couple of 100 kilograms. Have you got a sense of the vertical load on that splitter at speed? Like what were you actually fighting against here?
I mean, we have the numbers from the CFD that we've been running, and at I think at 300k kph, it's like something like 1.8 tons over it. So it is. I mean, and to be honest, when you look at it, it doesn't need to be, in my opinion. This is not Formula One. So if I get some sort of flex, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, the FIA probably aren't going to be penalising you.
Exactly.
You're not going to be getting technical directives.
Exactly. So for me, it's still okay. But I think the first version we had, you couldn't even stand a person on the edge of the splitter, like on the left side. In the middle, you always could, standing 2-3 people. But on the edges, because the splitter is 2.5 meter wide, if you do like cross measuring from the closest rigid structural points, then it's like 1.5 meters out there. So it's quite far away. But we completely rebuilt that this winter. So instead of having this square aluminium profiles, we basically went back to old school tubing. And then we did a little bit of tubing net. And also now we have the fixing point is literally just behind the front bumper now. So now you can stand a bunch of people on the splitter and it's barely moving. So I think it's solved basically.
I think as a quick dirty test, putting a bunch of people standing on the splitter is always going to give you a good insight into what it's doing and how much flex you've actually got. I guess the same could go for the rear wing, presumably. Let's talk about this wheel speed issue, though. That's an interesting one. So first of all, for those who kind of are new to this, why do we need wheel speeds in the first place?
I mean, there comes a lot of good data from it, so you kind of know how fast you're moving. But in the end, it kind of comes with, because we don't have any ABS on the car, so I don't need it for that aspect. You would normally need it for that aspect, but I need it for the gear shift strategies basically. So I need to know how fast the car is moving, and also if there is any slip between front and rear, so then you can actually accommodate the gear shifts according to how fast the wheels or the drivetrain is kind of moving. So for me, it's basically just that. I use it only for the gear strategy and gear shifting, the paddle shift gear shifting with Motec.
I mean, a lot of people are probably wondering why that's important to the gear shift strategy, but it is because you're talking paddle shift here, and the calculations inside of the ECU, it's going to know what the input shaft speed is from engine RPM. It's going to know what the gear ratios are because you can program, or you do program the gear ratios into it, but then it's also constantly estimating what the current gear ratio is based on reversing the calculations via wheel speed as well. So that all sort of plays into it. You've got a fallback there if a sensor is not working. Also, obviously critical for traction control, but are you running traction control in this car?
To be honest, we haven't had the use of it yet. It sounds strange, but the car grips good. So,
well, with 1.8 ton of downforce, I'd expect it probably would hook up pretty good.
Yeah,
of course. The issue with aero cars is that's all well and good when you're at high speed, but low speed corners you're still really focusing on mechanical grip, where the aero's maybe not as effective, right?
Correct. And to be honest, the aero is kind of, I would say, extreme in that end, but it's also kind of built for the low speed tracks we have in Sweden here. It's not many tracks that we do 300 kilometers an hour on. So it does create, so the curve of the aero, how it generates is quite aggressive. And I believe now the car is a bit heavier than planned at the beginning. But I remember when we looked at this, we said that technically it would create its own weight at 110 kilometers an hour if the car was something like 1,100 kilograms.
Okay, that's a lot of downforce at that speed.
It is, and I would say majority of downforce comes through the floor. The wing isn't, we run the wing at I think like 0 or 1 degree angle. So it's not that, but the floor is kind of the money maker here, and also it doesn't really generate that much drag. So the coefficient of the floor is really nice. So
yeah, I think that's the when you're designing an aero package, and I'm by no means an aerodynamicist, but you sort of almost get a free pass when you're using the floor to generate downforce, because it doesn't come with the high levels of drag that you're going to get from a rear wing. So if you can optimize that, you're definitely going to be in pretty good shape. If you're a fan of the podcast and you're interested in topics like engine tuning, automotive wiring, performance engine building, 3D modeling in CAD, or anything else in the high-performance industry, I have something that you might be interested in. Introducing the High Performance Academy VIP package. This package of courses gives you lifetime access to all of HPA's online training for one price. These courses cover everything from tuning and reflashing petrol and diesel engines, through to motorsport wiring, engine building, fabrication, design, car setup, and plenty more. Right now, you can get $500 off High Performance Academy's VIP package using the code PODCAST500 at checkout. Becoming a VIP means you'll never pay for another course again. You'll get instant access to all 40 plus courses we currently offer, plus every new course we ever release in the future. Want to define maps or tune with WinOLS? Curious about CAN bus devices, or how CAD can help make your dream build a reality? These in-depth topics, as well as many others, each have their own dedicated course that are going to help you master whatever it is you want to learn. And as a VIP member, you're not just getting the courses, you'll also join HPA's online community with lifetime access to our member forums and members' webinar lessons. Again, the code is podcast500 for that $500 discount. Just head over to hpacademy.com to check out the full VIP package and everything it contains. All right, let's get back to the episode. Now, I'll just want to get back to this wheel speed issue, but the fact that you're not running ABS is interesting. Is this again because you've got so much grip from the downforce that you don't feel that ABS is essential? I mean, it comes down to obviously personal preference. A lot of people will argue that it takes away from driver skill, and there's absolutely no argument from me. It does. You know, you mash the brake pedal as hard as you can and the car stops. It's not that difficult. But yeah, what's your take on that?
So to be honest, I was in the early stages, I was looking to put ABS on the car. But I am really fortunate here because I do have, like, one of my biggest sponsors / partners is a well-known brand brake pad manufacturer and brake manufacturer, which is called Endless. And so they have, of course, they originate from Japan, but then the European office is literally 5 minutes from my workshop. And I didn't know this back then, but when my father back in the days was working in milling and lathe workshops, he was actually doing a bunch of stuff for the owner of Endless Europe. So I have a really, really good partnership with them, and I have the luxury of getting help with the exact amount of compound or the different compounds to test the best setup here. If you would do that, without having a good support, then it would be quite costly in the end. And then I would say, okay, but hey, the ABS is going to pay itself way quicker than trying, 15 different compounds over a year. But because with Endless and all of the data I can get from them, we actually managed to set a really good compound on the car right now with the weights and also with kind of some of the data we have on the aero. And it hasn't been an issue yet. Of course, we haven't pushed the car to 100% or even 110%. So it might be an issue going down the road. But even for the old car I had, which was a heavy E90 M3, we didn't run ABS on that either. Even in rain, I was out braking people without ABS. So I had good experience with that so far. So I might need to eat my shoe later on, but we'll see.
As I mentioned, it is definitely personal preference. And if you've got the setup absolutely dialed in, there's no argument that a competent driver can do a really, really good job of stopping a car without ABS. I think where the ABS really comes into play is maybe for the more, let's say, gentleman drivers, maybe less experienced, but also just getting consistency, lap after lap, corner after corner, as the tires degrade, as the track conditions change, as your fuel load changes. And with the ABS, you're going to get consistency every time you press that brake pedal. But like I say, the personal preference, and there is no argument that it takes some of the driver skill away from it. I think where it sort of becomes more important as well as when you've got a class where everyone else has it. And if I'm talking here like proper motorsport grade ABS, not production grade ABS, if everyone else has it and you don't, sometimes that can put you at a disadvantage. But yeah, if you don't need it at the moment, All power to you.
Yeah, we'll see.
The actual issue with your wheel speed sensors, though, we've kind of talked around this for a bit and gone in a whole bunch of different directions. Let's bring it back to that. What was the problem here?
So in the end, I wanted to keep the sensors and the wheel bearings as simple as possible. So I didn't want to have any, specialty parts here where I would need to order a new sensor and it would be weeks away. So I tried to stay as OEM as possible. So the wheel bearings in the end are from an Iveco, like a truck, basically like a delivery truck, big delivery truck, because the wheel bearings are 60 mil wide and they have the out diameter of 90 mils. So they are quite beefy. And I think for the aero loads we're running, then I think this is a good option. And then I actually found wheel bearings that had this magnetic ring on one side of them. And then I said, okay, perfect. Then I basically did lids where, the bearing is kind of behind the center hub. So I made nice lids where we would stick in the sensors and we would read the magnetic rings. But you would have the sensors angled on a specific way on the left side of the car. Well, on the other side, it will be 180 reverse. And then, when we started testing, we said, hey, wait, these sensors actually are not reading on the back side of the sensor. So then we completely need to redo it or rethink it, because we couldn't, with the mounting points we had, I couldn't fit the sensor there because the cable was 90 degrees to the left. So on the left side, the cable went between the kind of the cutouts on the upright. But on the other side, it would be hitting the brake disc. So I couldn't fit it like that. So then, I had to figure this out. So then in the end, we had to basically cut on the back side of the uprights. So we rotated the wheel bearings. So the magnetic rings are on the inside of the upright. And then we basically put the sensors from the back on the upright.
Okay.
And then we could angle it up or down, and it didn't really matter. So that kind of solved it in the end. But it was quite, the tolerances were quite, so when you press in the bearing, you want to have some sort of edge where the bearing kind of sits against. And this edge was way too beefy in the beginning. So then when we did the drilling for the sensor in there, then it created quite sharp edges. And these edges started to shave the kind of the rubber material where the magnetic ring sits. So that worked for 1 or 2 laps. And then suddenly the wheel sensors didn't work anymore. And I was like, what's going on? And I lifted the car and said, wait, why is this a bunch of rubber in a small ball here? Oh, wait, okay, so we're basically shaving off the rubber on that. So, okay, take everything apart, go with the uprights back to the machine shop and redo it again. So yeah, it's been quite interesting issues we had.
Looking at that specific problem, and in hindsight, would you have been better to choose an off-the-shelf hub from some form of GT3 car?
Oh yeah,
and go with that?
Oh yeah,
obviously it's been designed and tested and validated.
For sure. I always said that because in the end we did the center hub assembly. So basically the main stub in there. We did that from a really nice tool steel.
Mm-hmm. So this is the center lock part.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically the one that kind of has the bearing on it, but also has the wheel with the aligning pin for the wheel, and then also the center lock nut, basically.
Yep.
But the thing is that yes, it would have been better, but with the time frame I had and with the limited funding I had, I could always dissect the working of a creating of these parts. I can make the upright now. And then a couple of months later, I will make the brackets for the calipers. And then I can make, let's do the 4 center stubs now. And then whatever, I can do the wheel nuts later. But if I would go and buy it, even though it would create a less headache just to buy it, because then it would work right away, I would still probably need to cash out some 10,000 USD or something like that for that. I'm not saying that the design we did in the end was cheaper, but I could kind of, dissect the cost and have it.
You could sort of creep up on it as opposed to having to smack down $10,000 in one lump sum.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get that. All right, moving on, where were the other issues, if any? I think we've covered most of them.
Yeah, I mean, we had the dry sump issues. We had
dry sump issues.
Yeah. So we had the dry sump issues, and this is thing. When we did the engine, many years when it was in my previous car, it had the same dry sump back then. We didn't really see those issues. We didn't really see those issues in the dyno either, because the dyno the oil system in the dyno was a closed loop. So it wasn't giving us that issues. But then I saw it in the previous car a little bit. It wasn't that that massive. But now when we put it in the M4, the engine, then as soon as we went on the track, we had, I wouldn't say massive blow-by, but we had quite a lot of gases going through the tank of the dry sump system, because the engine is fully closed, so we don't breathe anything out there. We basically suck everything from the engine with the four suction stages of the pump. But then in the end, what is that we had quite a lot of turbulences inside of the tank. So even though there was some sort of baffles to cope with this, it wasn't enough.
So you're aerating the oil?
Exactly. Well, I mean, we have an air separator for that. So I think the oil that's coming back is not that bad, but it's still creating this really nice vortex in top of the tank. And because we have such a high gas flow, it's creeps. So even if the ventilation is in top of the tank and we basically have the return a bit beneath that, it still wants to creep. So even it kind of creates this Venturi effect, basically, where you have a massive gas flow with a high speed going through a small AN line, and the velocity is a bit too high. So then whatever is squirting around there will go in that direction. So in the end, there was a super easy fix to this. One was getting the breather hose way bigger. So I think we ended up with like AN16 or AN20 breather hose going out, but then also creating the neck and the lid a bit higher on the tank. So rather than having the return back to the tank just 3 centimeters under the lid, we kind of raised the lid by 10 centimeters and then putting basically like a plate between the return and the breathing section of the tank.
So making it harder for that the gases that are going to be ventilated out of that tank to actually draw the oil with it.
Exactly. So
I'm really interested in this because this is something that there's two schools of thought on, and how we set up a dry sump system with a turbocharged or forced induction engine. Typically with a naturally aspirated engine, we run the engine completely sealed, and the benefit of that is that you're going to end up with a vacuum in the crankcase, which can improve ring seal and reduce windage losses. So that's where one of the advantages from a dry sump system comes in. The other, obviously, is consistent oiling. However, when we run a turbocharged or forced induction engine, no matter what you do, you're going to end up with an increase in blow-by. My own experience has been that no matter what you do, you're still going to end up with positive crankcase pressure with forced induction. When you're dry sumped, almost irrespective, you're not going to get that negative pressure, the vacuum. So I've always gone with ventilation breathers off the rocker covers anyway, off the cam covers, and run that back to the top of the dry sump tank or just to a catch can or something of that nature, so that we don't get that build-up of positive pressure. So what I see with the dry sump system is, in a forced induction application, is some positive crankcase pressure, but significantly less than what we'd see if it was a conventional wet sump engine. Really keen if you've got data on what sort of crankcase pressures you are seeing with that sealed system.
So yeah, and it's actually, this is, your thoughts are correctly, because I'm in that loop as well, because previously I didn't have a crankcase pressure on the engine. So I was just kind of guessing of what it was. Now we have it, but we did limited runs with that last year. So I think that's kind of my next step here to see, okay, what is that? The small test we have done so far, but it hasn't been on full boost, which is 0.82 bars of boost. We did like 155 last test, and that was still all negative. So I think that if it doesn't start to creep against 101 and it stays below that, then I think I will leave it. But if not, then I will reach out to you to figure out how we would breed it. Because in this case also, it's kind of two different versions of it. You can breed it, then breed it back to the tank, or you just open air breed it, basically. And I'm not sure what the positive benefits are with the two different versions.
I think it's just another one of those situations where everyone has their own preference of how they do it. I personally can't see a performance advantage from doing it one way or the other. The worst case scenario is getting fluid under the car and under the tyres. So we want to avoid that at all costs. So essentially what we've ended up doing is we run our breathers back into the dry sump tank, which is mounted in the rear of the car, just behind the sort of driver compartment, and then the breather from that, as well as the overflow from the cooling system, all runs to the back of the car into the trunk or boot area, and we've got a combined catch can in there, which basically, if that overflowed and leaked which is realistically should only happen if there was a major engine failure, any fluid that comes out of that is going to end up leaking out of the car behind the rear tyres, so it's safer. And then we've simply got an AN line that runs to a ball valve under the car, and we can drain that in the pits really easily. It's also a good sanity check as well, because draining that, you go out and do a session, drain it and see what comes out of it. Gives you a pretty good idea of engine health, particularly if you're starting to see a lot of oil come out of that, or maybe oil and water. Never a good look. So that's a good way of keeping an eye on that. But yeah, again, everyone's got their own particular take on doing it. I don't see a performance advantage. Back when I was racing my old Evo drag car, we actually went to the trouble. We had 2-10 AN lines, I think, breathers from the cam cover on that 4G63. And I actually had one-way valves in that, so that we could actually pull a vacuum. In hindsight, looking back at it, I think it was absolutely a waste of time. But we could pull a vacuum until the crankcase pressure became positive, and then those would open and allow it to breathe. But yeah, I mean, considering that was probably good coming up to the start line, but basically from the time it left the line on positive boost, it was already positive crankcase pressure. So I don't think I was achieving much in the end.
No. I think the benefit on my car is that I have a massive floor under the car. So if there will be any oil leaks, then it's going to be on the floor and not on the ground. So that's a positive, I guess.
Yeah, definite advantage. All right, so where to from here?
Yeah, I mean, with all of the small issues we had last year, and also we kind of touched on the topic with the fixing points for the splitter and for the wing, it kind of really became obvious that the wing mounting points wasn't good enough when we did the last test in September last year. I did a full speed run, and then suddenly I saw that the rear reverse camera changed angle a bit. And I was like, why is this going on? So I went on the straight and I saw the guys was doing the cross, like stop. And then I came back and I was like, whoa. So the wing mount brackets basically completely broke off on left side. So the wing was fully almost dragging to the ground. The lucky thing here was that the braces that we have around the wing kind of connecting to the uprights of the wing parts, those broke in glue. So the wing didn't break by any means, but it just got out of form and it was hanging. If I would do another run, then it would have been game over with that wing. And before this, we actually had a wing that failed because we were a bit too stressed, loaded the car for the test at KW, and the car got loose in the trailer. So when I did a braking at the construction site, the car stopped against the wall of the trailer with the wing. So we basically broke the wing in half.
That's pretty far from ideal.
Yeah.
In terms of those wing mounts, the uprights, again, how were you designing these? Any sort of FEA done in CAD, or is this sort of more of a, how would you put it, best practices, looking at it, spitballing, that we think is going to be adequate for the forces and loads involved?
No, so that was fully done by Paul at Verus, who did all of this. So when he did the design, he had the wing in there as well. Because we have such a low profile on the car, and we also wanted to get the benefit of the wing with the rear diffuser, so that the wing is hanging really far back and really low. So a little bit like kind of the old, Le Mans cars, like even like the Mazda,
like Group C style.
Exactly. So it's kind of like that. So, and when he did that, I mean, he did some calculations on what it needs to be, and then I kind of overdid it a little bit more. So in the end, we ended up with like 10 mil thick 70-75 aluminum plates. So the uprights itself, they are good to go. But it was kind of the fixing points to the tube frame that failed in the end. So
very similar to what you had with the splitter at the front.
Exactly. And in the back, we ended up with a really nice cross pattern of tubes, which I basically got hold of a 3D scanner, scanned the fixing points, and then I designed everything in CAD with the piping. And because I don't know if how familiar you are with it or how happy you are with it, but kind of notching pipes, when you have super strange angles, it's kind of pain in the butt, to be honest. So what I did was actually I draw out everything in CAD. I notched all of the pipes with kind of the outer and inner layers of the pipings, and then I did small sleeves over that, which I 3D printed. So every intersection I did small sleeves with the cutouts. Then I put these 3D printed sleeves of the pipe, drew it, cut it, and it was perfect fit right away. So I should have done that from the beginning.
Yeah, just one more use of CAD. I had not actually thought of that. That's brilliant. Yeah, notching tubes at funny angles can be really tricky. It's definitely not something I do a lot of, but it's so critical as well, because if you don't get the notch correct, then the fit-up's going to be off, and then the knock-on effect is it's going to be harder to weld. You're going to end up putting more heat into the material. In terms of material, what are you using here? Is this a chromoly or?
No, it's actually a Swedish magic pipe, I call it. So everything for the safety cell of the car, yeah, it's a really nice pipe. But so basically, everything for the safety cell of the car around the driver, that is normal steel pipes, and that is due to the regulations. So if you are like a fully certified guy that can do safety cages, then you can do it from chromoly, any other, and you can use the TIG as well. But if you're not, then you need to do steel pipes and you need to MIG it.
I think that's actually smart. The argument, of course, for chromoly is that we can use a thinner wall section of chromoly versus a mild steel tube and get the same strength. But the downside with chromoly is that you have to be very, very careful where you weld it, because if you put too much heat into the weld, it's going to create a brittle area on either side of the heat affected zone, and that can end up cracking and failing there. So
exactly.
Mild steel, yeah, it's going to be a little bit heavier, but it's going to also be much more forgiving when you weld it. And of course, for those who aren't professional motorsport fabricators, laying down a good MIG weld is infinitely easier than a good TIG weld, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not by any means a pro welder, even though I have a good partnership with ESAB, which, provide amazing machines for me, but it's not, I'm not by any means that. So I think that, as you say, I've actually saw when we did the build, I actually saw from a really famous rallycross or rally fabricator here in Sweden who did a chromoly chassis, and the car crashed. And all of the cuts, or basically the break-offs of the pipe, was 1 centimeter from the welds. So, and that's kind of what you will see and what you're explaining here with the chromoly stuff. So we ended up, for everything that's kind of not safety critical, which we can wing it a little bit more, we actually used a pipe called Ducol R8, which is very much used now in drag racing and other sports.
Yeah, I'm probably getting a little deep into the metallurgy weeds here, and I'm not super familiar with Ducol. However, from what I understand, basically almost marries together the benefits of chromoly and mild steel, in that you get the strength and weight advantages of chromoly, but it doesn't have the sort of fussiness around the welding that chromoly does.
Correct.
I think it's pretty hard to get here in New Zealand, I believe.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, even in Sweden, it's quite difficult, because it's a Swedish company called SSAB who makes it. But I think, like in Sweden, it's just kind of still one racing company who provides the pipes. So you need to go to them to get it. So it's not super easy to get it either. So fortunately, this company is like 1 hour away from me, so it's not difficult. But basically, everything that's kind of not outside of the safety cell is made from that. And then we are at some areas we have like 1.5 mil wall thickness, and other, like for the wing stuff, we have like 1 mil thickness. So it's really sturdy. So
okay. I mentioned the term finite element analysis before. So this is a method where we can use CAD software like Autodesk Fusion and basically apply loads to a part that we've designed in CAD, and then see how it's likely to deform. There's sort of I've talked about this on the podcast in the past numerous times, and it does become a case of garbage in, garbage out. And by that, I mean, in order to get useful results, we need to accurately understand what the sort of loads are likely to be. But is this something that, the average enthusiast can leverage these abilities in Fusion and get useful results, or is this really something that's sort of more limited to professionals who are in the industry working and using FEA every day?
I mean, you're right on the topic, right? Whatever data you put in is kind of whatever you get out. So and I played around with the structural test in Fusion. Now I went back to the kind of the personal use license, so I don't have that feature anymore. But when I did, kind of the wing uprights was one of the parts which we tried. And I believe that I even now recently really got really good software from Siemens. So I actually got hold of 3 softwares, which one of them is CFD software, which is massively complex. But I think for what Fusion gives you and the ability for a person who doesn't work with this every day, then I think it's useful, to be honest. I think you will get some, even if the data from the kind of deformation you will get from that maybe doesn't tell you anything, but you will still see kind of how much with X amount of forces will it move and where it will move. So you will actually see, are my fixing points the problem, or is maybe the swan neck back of the wing is the problem, or like you will get a hunch of, okay, not good enough.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Just understanding where the sort of weak point is going to be, and then obviously it's easy for you to go ahead and redesign that part for free in the virtual world, and then run that test again. Okay, yeah, am I getting an improvement? We're moving in the right direction now. Basically, what I'm getting at is we want to leverage all of the available technology if we can, so that we don't get into this position where you find out the hard way that a part actually isn't up to the task. I mean, I think it's fair to say that obviously you can end up having a fairly catastrophic accident if something like a rear wing fails at pace, through a corner. So you go from having a huge amount of downforce to almost nothing in an instant. That's not going to end well, right?
Exactly. And I think that, I mean, if you look at most of the kind of the normal cars where you would have maybe an original OEM body on it and you would put a wing on it kind of just above the trunk, then you would get away with, I would say, almost everything, right? As long as it doesn't deform where it sits, or you mount it directly to a really thin aluminum trunk, you would get away with quite a lot of things. But like from my car, if you look at it, where the mounting points of the wing are in the tube frame versus where the wing actually sits, it's over a meter away, and it's not straight up. It's basically straight to the back. So
it's a big lever arm that force is acting through. So yes, I can understand why there's going to be some potential for flex in there.
Exactly.
Just talking about how you'd mount it to a conventional body, it still surprises me the number of cars I see where someone's mounted just a off-the-shelf rear wing straight onto the boot or trunk lid, no bracing underneath, no supports. I mean, if that wing is doing almost anything, it's just going to end up flexing that boot lid. It's going to be next to useless.
Yeah, I actually had that on my previous car, exactly like this. But I had a really smart contraption under the bonnet, so under the trunk. So basically, when you closed it, there was a really nice support frame that the outer layer kind of bonded with this. So people were like surprised, how can it be sturdy enough to be on the trunk? But then I opened and people are like, wow, okay, that's smart. So
yeah, no, I've seen that exact solution before. It's sort of a nice sort of middle of the road, because otherwise it gets really tricky. I mean, if you're going to have uprights that go through the trunk lid all the way down to made up to the chassis rails, I mean, that's the dream really, but then it makes it really difficult how you're going to open the trunk. Obviously sometimes you need to get in there for whatever reason. Maybe you've got a fuel system or a surge tank in there. So it all comes down to that practicality of getting the car to do the job that you want it to do, but also be serviceable, like we were mentioning at the start. All right, I think the only other potential teething problem that I could maybe predict from my own experience is cooling system issues. How did the engine and the oil system cope in terms of temperature?
So I could easily say here, yeah, it's not been a problem, but we haven't also really pushed the car in that aspect. So, but the cooling system, I think, to be honest, with the cooling of the engine water, I got away quite good there, because I do have a really nice tunneling thing going through the hood and out. So whenever we start to run the car, the air actually gets tunneled through the front bumper into the cooler and then out through the hood. So, so the water cooler was always working quite good until we had to reposition it a little bit to get better spacing and also accommodate the new piping for the splitter. So that we then replaced the cooler this winter for a bit beefier one. It's a bit smaller in dimension, but it's a bit thicker one. So I think it's like 80 millimeter thick. And that actually has worked well. Yeah, even so we did a test 2 weeks ago when I think I did like 6-7 really hard push laps. And I think we were like, 83 degrees on the water and like 92 on the oil. So so it's actually not stressed in that aspect. And also now with the front bumper a bit changed, and also I completely rearranged the intercoolers because that wasn't good enough in my opinion. So now we're also looking at much lower inlet air temperatures as well. So I think we did the test 2 weeks ago. We had some 23 degrees Celsius in the air, and I think we were running like 24 degrees on intake. Yeah, so it was quite good. But also, this is on 0.55 bars of boost, so it's literally nothing.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, you couldn't expect much better than that. That's
No, yeah.
it's pretty close to ambient. I assume here, I assume that you've got a bit of a head start on this cooling system design simply because you had scanned a model car of the M4 DTM. And I guess you're kind of pretty much cheating on BMW's homework here because they've done all the hard work with the design of the inlet, the front bumper, and also those outlets. I've not had that much success with cooling system performance in our own 86 to the point where we are going through a bit of a redesign now of the front duct. It is challenging. There's a lot of moving parts here, and you're also, I think probably you've got a little bit more flexibility in terms of packaging than we do, given that we're working off a production car, and where you can fit the cooler pack and how you can duct that between the back of the radiator, and then we've got a tight spacing between that and the front of the engine to get that ducting out through the hood or the bonnet. I think the design point or issue that we might be facing at the moment was actually the inlet ducting being just a little bit too small. So we'll see how that goes. But I find that with our car, we can keep that cool at maybe sort of 1.2 bar. And that's fine because that's typically where it's run for endurance racing. However, for a sprint race, if I want to run 1.6, 1.7 bar, we sort of can do that for 2 or 3 laps before the temperature starts creeping up. So we're obviously just right on the limit there. In terms of sizing the coolers, is this sort of, how did you go about that? Is this sort of guesswork where you partnered with a cooling system manufacturer, supplier?
I mean, no, to be honest, I can accommodate basically a living room of size over there. So it's because from the furthest part on the tube frame to the front bumper, it's over 1 meter basically. And there is and where the tube frame starts, there is no engine there. There's the suspension package. So I can literally do kind of what I want. The only thing is a little bit difficult is that the angles, because if you look at the car, the DTM, that the replica that I have, is that it's not typically tall, this car. If you stand beside it, it's like 110 centimeters to the ground, to the roof of the car. So the front bonnet of the car, like if you look at the normal car, you would have the top of the front bonnet, and then you will have a sliding angle going out to the wheel arches. Where on my car, the wheel arches are exactly the same level as the bonnet. So the top of the car is basically 680 millimeter tall, slick size. So that's kind of the problem, where you go in on a really low angle and you have a splitter and some stuff there, but then you need to kind of ramp it quickly up through the hood. And as you say, we kind of freebased on that DTM style that they had. But I also saw that when they went for the latest version of turbo engines, those outlets in the bonnet was way bigger. So I was a little bit worried about that. But I think that in the end, the last test we did also, we had some of the channeling for all of this, the tunneling inside was missing. So we're actually lifting the hood in some speeds. So I think that the airflow, it's kind of funny because when we went for one of these 24-hour races to showcase the car was then driven with endless big race trailer to Germany. And because my workshop is so close, I was like, you know what, I'm going to drive the car there. So we removed the splitter. It was in the middle of the summer. I was driving it on the normal roads like nothing. But because there wasn't a splitter and all of this tunneling was not there, then it was actually not creepy. It was actually creeping in temperature.
So you weren't actually getting that airflow directed through the coolers.
Exactly. So I think that because we have such a straight airflow going through all of this packaging, then I could even get away with a smaller cooler, to be honest. But right now, the sizing I have is kind of what we tested the first version, but now it's a little bit thicker only. So, and it's not even a double pass on it. It's just kind of top left in, bottom right out. So
from my perspective, I'd always like to have a little bit of headroom in the cooling system rather than run it right on the limit. I mean, it only takes a really hot day in summer and you're kind of in bad shape. So for maybe a small hit on weight, I think having that cooling system potential in your sort of back pocket is definitely worthwhile. One of the things that's really obvious about the car when you look at it, and we'll link to Karel's Instagram account for people who haven't seen it before, it's just about touching the ground when it's stationary. How much actual sort of gap, I guess, have you got between the bottom of that front splitter and the ground at static ride height?
So if I showed you 5 different pictures, it would be 5 different ride heights. But data from the CFD says it should be 3 centimeters in the front.
Okay.
So it should be 3 centimeters in the front, and then the car should have somewhat a front hanging rake on the car. So basically, the splitter marries nicely with the floor. And then the diffuser on the floor starts to ramp somewhat, almost, I would say, like a meter behind front wheel, it starts to ramp. So and in the back, the skirts on the diffuser are set to be 7 centimeters. So 3 in the front, letting air in, but we're also letting air in on the sides. So we do have some supply on the sides of the floor as well.
How do you keep this thing off the ground then if your static ride height at the front splitter is only 3 centimeters? How are you keeping this off the ground at, let's say, 300 kilometers an hour at the end of a straight?
Super easy. You just go to KW and get the best suspension. No, I'm kidding. No, but we have, as I said, it's not by any means a pro engineering design here, but we have something called a heave spring. So we have 3 dampers in the front, and then we have 3 dampers in the back. So you could probably accommodate this with just 4 dampers, left and right corners. But then those would need to be quite stiff, because if you do 100 kph, you have somewhat of a pressure pushing the car down. But if you do 300, then it's going to be way more. So if you want to accommodate the 300 with only 4 dampers, then they will need to be quite stiff. And then the low speed handling of the car is not going to be that good.
So you compromise your low speed mechanical grip because essentially you have to run a spring rate that is way too high.
Exactly. And until, so I think we're getting to that topic where until we had some sort of tests on this, I mean, doing something on the track, okay, it's working, it's not scraping, it's kind of keeping, but with the sensors now, you can also see it. But until we had the test at KW, I couldn't really confirm how good this is working. So we didn't really know. We showcased the car at the Nürburgring 24-hour race like 2 years ago. And then the head engineer of KW, their motorsport division, actually went by and stood, looked at the car for 45 minutes. Didn't say a word. And I was so ready to get, mangled with, who did this? Why is this? This is crazy. But he just didn't say anything, went away. And then their PR responsible came back and she was like, okay, he was really impressed with the car. So we want to treat you to a 7-post testing. So prior to this, we had done a bunch of testing on the track. And, and we also did some reading on the tire temperatures and kind of how are we activating the tires? Are we actually getting somewhat, in the end, it's measuring contact patch load, right? How good are you loading the tire against the ground? So I thought it was good prior to going to the test. But then when I brought the car to KW in southern Germany, and we did 3 days of testing. And the first day we did, so what they are doing.
Let's just pause this for a second, because I'm going to assume that a good portion of the people listening to this have never heard the term 7-post rig before. So can you give us an understanding of what this shaker rig is all about and how it works?
Yeah. So, and it's, to be honest, my knowledge is limited here as well. So I'm fully relying on the guys from KW. But so basically what a 7-post rig is that I think that for many years back, it maybe wasn't so used for like amateur racing and whatnot. It was kind of Formula One stuff where they would strap a car to a rig that sits on 4 posts. And these posts would then basically plates that you put on the tire. And under the plates, you have these hydraulic cylinders, which would then simulate the surface that you're driving on.
Basically, it can simulate the car going over bumps, irregularities in the track.
Exactly. So, and then they know that, okay, all of these different bumps that you can occur on a racetrack are between 1 and 20 hertz or whatever. So then they basically do sweep us all of this, and they are measuring everything. So you have sensors on the plates, you have sensors on the rims, and you have sensors on the chassis. So you see all of these correlations between what's happening. So whenever you start to run this sweep, you basically push one of these plates up, and the damper and the wheel and everything compresses. and then you release it and go back again. And then you measure, okay, how good are you keeping this contact to the ground? And if you push that wheel quickly up and then you go quickly down with the plate and it's not following, then you don't have a good patch contact, basically.
So this can be used to help dial in your high speed and low speed compression and rebound settings on your dampers.
Exactly. And that's kind of the easy part of it, where you could just go on the clicks. But then in the end, you can also actually see, is the valving in the damper correct? Is it sufficient? If you go high on the clicks or low on the clicks, is it sufficient? But then you can also see kind of what is the spring rates you need to have for this. So you have, I would say, 3 different versions of this test rig, which this 4-post is basically you testing the car with the wheels on these plates. Then you have 6-post. Then you also starting to pull the car with aero loads. So you can simulate going 200 kilometers an hour. The car gets pushed down by X amount of kilograms because of the wing and whatnot. But then you also have the latest one, which is the 7-post. And I think this is the most common one for like GT3 cars, where then they would strap hydraulic arms to the front axle, but then also to the back left and right side. So basically behind, like when they do it on the Porsche GT3s, they just do it a little bit in front of the rear wheels.
So now you're able to actually manipulate the entire chassis plane as well as the 4 wheels.
Exactly. And you can also start to roll the chassis left and right to simulate that as well. So that was kind of the main idea that we wanted to do with this, to do the 7-post. But then when I start to understand, hey, how much are the forces on these hydraulic arms pulling the car down, then I was struggling to figure out how would I mount this to the car.
The last thing you want to do is deform the chassis just for a test.
Exactly, yeah. And it's to be honest, when you do the test, it's very violent. Like having a wing on the car, rear wing, they don't recommend that. Not even for the GT3 cars. They say it's better to remove it because the frequencies are so high in the end, everything shakes off. So for me, it was kind of, hey, okay, let's see how many screws we can collect in a bag when we go home. But we managed good. But when we did the first sweep there, we saw that the contact patch load was like on a negative 70% or something. It was like horrible. It was really bad. And this is the benefit with KW. Just 100 meters away from them, from that test rig, is their motorsport workshop. So, amount of limitless of springs and literally everything. So we played around quite a lot with the springs, but then the guys in the end figured out that, hey, the valving in your setup is not good enough. So what we did was that we disassembled all 6 dampers, went and dropped them off at the motorsport department, went for lunch, came back, and they have completely disassembled the dampers, changed the valving in there, put it together, run it in a separate suspension dyno, and then we put it back on.
Yeah, I think that's probably something. I'm not a damper specialist either, but if you've got an off-the-shelf damper and you've got, maybe it's something that's designed for your chassis, and obviously yours is completely bespoke. But I'm talking here a production road car. You go and buy your off-the-shelf. Let's say it's KW or it's MCA or whatever it might be. But then you develop the car, and now it's creating significant downforce, and then you're upping the spring rate to get your frequency where it needs to be. You can get yourself into a situation where, while the damping curve is adjustable with your bump and rebound, you may actually be outside of the range of adjustability. So that's what you're facing here. You need to actually have the valving change so you're back in the window.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, as you say, like when you use this on an OEM car, there's so much data about it, right? Because they like, even KW in this case, they are like, when they do a kit for OEM car, they run it on the 7-post. Because when we were there, just right after, they put like a strap like a Lambo Huracan on the post and run it for a couple of days to make a kit for that car. So, and that car is not going to differ that much, right? Even an OEM car, even if you put a splitter on and a wing on it, it's kind of be somewhat in the ballpark. And they will probably, any suspension manufacturer will never really put it on the limit. There's going to be wiggle room. But for my car, so the 2 differences that we saw was that, one, the valving wasn't sufficient. And the second was that we actually made the dampers way too big. So the travel of the dampers was way too much. So we actually had one of their head design engineer guys when stopped by because they wanted to look at it. And he said, why didn't you just do one of these F1 super tight compact dampers? Because you have, in the end, when we did the car, with 1 ton of downforce, we had some 15, 20 mils of travel. So it doesn't make sense that we have a damper that's 80, 90, 100 mils of travel because we never use it. So when you have a damper that has like 100 mil of travel and you're only using a portion of it, then kind of the resolution of adjustments will be a bit difficult as well. So maybe that's going to be a step in the direction in the future where we will redesign this. But I was surprised how good the third spring is working when we tried it, because the really nice thing with 7-post or 6-post in this case is that you can actually hang over your dampers while you run this test. So you can literally be there like 5 centimeters from the damper and look at it, see what's going on. So we saw that when the car wasn't loaded at all with aero and we started to roll the chassis, then we did a mechanical bummer here where the endpoints of the third spring was actually hitting the tube frame. So when you start to roll it, the third should just follow along. It shouldn't compress by any means, but because it was hitting end stops on the tube frame, it was compressing. So as soon as we loaded the car with a ton on the front and rear axle, then it was actually following nice. So compressing straight down, going straight, all 3 dampers was working really nicely. And then we could also see that when we start to apply the load with the aero on it, we could see, okay, 300 kilograms of load, 400, 500. Then you can actually see when you start to activating the third spring. Just after this test, when we came back from KW, I took the car to airstrip and did just, zigzag up, down this airstrip. And we had like 60 degrees on the tires. And I was like, whoa. So it is, it's a massive difference, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously that's kind of out of the realm of what the average enthusiast is going to be able to ever leverage. I hate to think what the cost of 3 days of testing on that rig would have been. From my understanding, this has sort of been leveraged a lot more, maybe in the last decade or maybe more than that, as professional motorsports have basically tried to cap costs by limiting on-track testing. So the teams have had to find more innovative ways of actually testing and dialing in things like their suspension settings, and that's where these rigs come into play. I'm interested if you're also using bump stops and packers as part of your sort of aero control as opposed to just that heave spring. Most people think of the bump stop as a last resort and we're not going to run into it. But however, when we're talking about aero cars, quite often they are actually purposely run into the bump stops to sort of get that compromise between low-speed mechanical grip without running the thing into the ground at 300 kilometers an hour.
No, we actually had the discussions about it when we were at KW. So, hey, should we add bump stops to it? And there are different versions of it, different materials that you can utilize, and you can even use shims to get it in the right levels and whatnot. But after the 3 days testing we did, we didn't really see a need for that, because if we had issues to keep the ride height, we just preload the third element more.
Okay.
So we wouldn't even need to do anything with the corners of the car. Basically, we would just preload the third element or change the spring on the third element. The setup is super basic. It's basically 2 rollers that are utilizing the left and right corner through a push rod actuation. So we have bars going from the wheel up to these rollers. And then because the rollers are basically rolling against each other, then there's a third element over those 2 rollers. So it's not by any means full billet stuff. It's literally steel pipes with some flanges on it, and it works good.
I probably should have talked about what this third element or heave spring actually is. It's come up on the podcast before, but for those who haven't heard of this before, quite common on anything with a lot of aerodynamic downforce, and it basically allows when the car's in roll, the individual dampers on each side of the car operate independently as you'd expect, and when we're getting a downforce on both of them, that's what we get at high speed with the aerodynamics. Then this heave spring comes into play when both dampers are being compressed at the same time, and helps to sort of basically keep the car off the ground. Where does testing go to from here then, Karel? What's the sort of next plan?
So we had some issues with some of the things sticking to the car at high speed. And it's not so much, I mean, the splitter is good now, but now suddenly we have issues with some body panels and whatnot really, staying in place. So we have a competition, I believe, end of June. So prior to that, we will probably do 2 testings. One of them will be an airfield where we just, floor it 300 kph and see what happens. And then most of the things are set. So now I'm kind of getting into that section of this car where we can actually start utilizing the sensors and looking at the data and kind of, figuring out what's the next step. Because all of the issues that we had so far has been kind of going to a track day, getting issues, okay, go home, fix it. Going to the track day again, new issue, fix it. But now it seems that most of the kind of the blockers are fixed. So we just want to see that the body panels are staying in place, and then beside of getting all of the new aero parts, which we are doing on the side, we want to go for a full race, which is end of June.
Okay. So 2025 is hopefully, fingers crossed, the year for you?
I don't want to cross the fingers. I think it's kind of make it or break it, to be honest, because it's kind of I think for you kind of, we talked about this with the first podcast, but a lot of people now don't really like, why don't you drive it? Where's the lap times? Like, people don't really understand that it's kind of me and previously was a friend, which is Kalle. He now got 2 kids, small kids, so he's out of the picture. And now I have a friend called Ludde who's helping. But it's kind of us two. It's not 10 people. So we are even at that problem where, we go to the track and he can't join. Then, okay, maybe I can't go because I don't have anyone helping me closing the door when I go on the track. It's kind of that aspect of it. And I've been literally, working my butt off to get it done. And then, the clarity of that isn't, people think that just make it happen, go. What's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think people who haven't built a car at this level don't necessarily have a good understanding of what actually is involved. And no matter how thorough you are, no matter how well you've done all of your calculations, no matter what experts you've engaged to help you along the way, you are absolutely not going to have a car like that roll out onto the track for the first time and everything just go absolutely perfectly. And I think there's just this unrealistic expectation now on the internet of, you build a car over several years and then it's just out racing. I mean, that's the dream, but I'm going to guess that probably happens maybe 1 in 20 times. And all the rest of the times, there's going to be some work to fix it. And like you say, you've got a full-time job working 60 hours a week. So there's only so much you can do. Coming back to what you said as well, I think that there is a complexity that comes when these cars get so extreme and you can no longer just sort of load the thing onto a trailer by yourself, head out to the track for a club event on your own and go and race it, where it actually does need at least 1 or 2 people to do all the little tasks and make sure that it's ready to run. So that obviously limits what you can do as well.
It's kind of funny when you mentioned the trailer, because we actually, in the end for this year, we actually cut off like 2 meters of the rear diffuser just to be able to load the car without 7-meter ramps. So, small tweaks are getting there. But I think also on the topic of getting something, from a build to a really working stage, I do have a lot of people that are in the professional motorsport that are following me, and I do talk with them on Instagram. And I think there are a couple of F1 aero guys and also a lot of BMW motorsport guys that work with BMW today. They have seen the car. And I asked them, hey, have you talked about this at BMW in München? And they say, yeah, we have talked about it. I say, okay, that's cool. But even they are mentioning that, hey, when we roll out a new GT3, there's a reason why a new GT3 is tested for a full year before they release it to the customers, because even those cars have massive, headaches and gremlins in the beginning. So if it's 1 year for them, it might be 3 years for me, but I think we are on a good path now.
Yeah, we have the same here with our SR86, and I mean, it's no secret that the development path of that has been challenging, is how I'd put it. To put a positive spin on it, challenging. And we in our endurance racing here in New Zealand, the competition for us has been TCR, factory built race cars.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly difficult to build a home-built car that is going to be reliable and competitive with a factory-built race car. So that also, though, is incredibly rewarding when we actually do manage to beat them. And it happens. Basically, the car is either on or near the podium, or it's on the trailer after several laps. And it hasn't really seen a lot of in between. But like you, I'm hoping that 2025 might be our year. we'll keep our fingers crossed for ourselves as well as you. Now, I just wanted to also come back a little bit. We had a quick chat before we started recording here about the engine tuning specifically, and I wanted to dive into this a little bit because you've got an engine that delivers some complexities in that you've got individual throttle bodies and you've got 2 turbochargers.
Correct.
So how do you go about dealing with this? I mean, most of the time, if we're a conventional single plenum, single throttle body, we would use a volumetric efficiency table where we've got manifold absolute pressure on one axis and engine RPM. We can't do that with individual throttle bodies and get good results. If it's naturally aspirated, we would run alpha N where we use throttle position on our load axis instead of manifold absolute pressure and then RPM. But of course, with turbocharging comes changes in manifold pressure as well above atmospheric. So give me a bit of an understanding of what you've done there with the MoTeC ECU.
Yeah, so it's, I have a really good close collaboration with MoTeC, and I've been running MoTeC on my cars for many, many years, and I kind of prefer the packaging. I also like the hardware they supply with this, and I think that the software, especially when you deep dive into the logging, like when you start to do the logging analysis, like the software they have, I mean, there is a reason why majority of the GT3 teams on Nürburgring are running a MoTeC i2 Pro for analysis and the live telemetry. I saw this early because on this specific engine, we had a supercharger in the beginning. And I have a MoTeC M150 controlling the engine. And of course, with the paddle shift, then I have a software called GPRP, which is basically a race software with race bits and pieces, but also the paddle shift functionality for the sequential gearbox. But with the supercharger, we were struggling so much to get it tuned because we were trying to lean on the manifold pressure sensor to get it. But it's quite difficult to get it in the right window because even if you do a full pull in a dyno, then that's one thing. You have a full open throttle, the RPM and comes, and then the turbo or the overpressure comes as well. But then when you go static, like when you go in a corner and you have 40% throttle or 30% throttle.
Yeah, it's the part throttle tuning that's impossible to get right if you've got individual throttle bodies plus boost and you're using manifold absolute pressure as your load axis.
Exactly. I think that, to be honest, the easiest way here would be just to yeet the ITBs away, the throttle bodies, and just put up one big one there. But I'm still kind of determined that I think it could be done. So I'm still keeping the MoTeC, but I managed to talk to a guy called John Reed in US, it's very knowledgeable about the MoTeC stuff, and he does have the development license. And I think this is kind of the neat part of MoTeC.
Can do whatever you want.
Exactly. Like if you are knowledgeable, you can basically take the build packaging that they have, and then you can kind of create your own stuff. And that's kind of what he did with that. So he has a GPRP based package, but it is running something called Alpha N. I wouldn't say it's a true Alpha N, where you tune it throttle versus RPM and then compensate with the overpressure with the manifold. But it's doing that really, really closely. So we ended up tuning the car with his package. So it's basically throttle, RPM, and then you use the MoTeC boost pressure calculations in the background. But then if you are a little bit outside of the window on positive pressure, then you also be able to adjust it in a second table. So you can basically go positive and negative in that table as well.
It's a complicated topic, so I'll just try and add a bit of explanation around why this is necessary or why this happens. So generally, I mean, I do this a lot. I used to tune a lot of Nissan GTRs, the R32, R33, R34 with the RB26. So in stock form, they come with 6 individual throttle bodies. Factory, they use 2 mass airflow sensors. So that makes all of these problems go away because the airflow sensors are just reporting mass airflow, which is what we need to provide fuel. However, in the aftermarket, obviously, we typically ditch those and go to a manifold absolute pressure sensor. So the way we would traditionally tune one of those is that our main volumetric efficiency table would be throttle position versus RPM. And then the problem with that is, well, let's go, say we go to 100% wide open throttle, and let's say we're achieving 0.5 bar of boost, just for argument's sake. So 0.5 bar, we're not that heavily stressed. Maybe we might want to run that at 0.90 lambda, maybe 0.95, something like that. So we tune everything at 100% throttle, and that all works nicely. And then we go from 0.5 bar to 1 bar. And if the ECU doesn't compensate in the background some way, we're still going to probably stay at 0.95 lambda, which is probably no longer appropriate at 1 bar of boost. So then the next thing we bring in is a air fuel ratio or lambda target table, and that's compensated or relative to manifold absolute pressure and RPM. So now, as the boost comes up, we can now start targeting different air fuel ratios. So that works quite well. And the background compensation here that the ECU will also have is a straight line compensation on manifold pressure, which means that if we double the boost pressure, in the background, the ECU will double the fueling, and all things being equal, that's what maintains that consistent air fuel ratio. Like I said, we might not want a consistent air fuel ratio, but that's where that lambda target table comes in. But then, just to add one more complexity, as we change our RPM and our boost pressure, we're moving through the efficiency area of the turbocharger. And everything works really, really nicely just using what I've already mentioned while we're staying in the fat of the compressor efficiency. But when we start pushing really hard and we start sort of moving outside of the efficiency range of the turbocharger, what we'll start to see, if we just have those systems in place we've discussed, is that at high RPM and high boost, we're going to start seeing our air fuel ratio taper off rich, because no longer is the turbo working as efficiently, we're starting to get back pressure build up, etc. So then we can bring in a 4D compensation table to correct that. So there's a lot of moving pieces going in there. I just wanted to get a bit of an explanation of what's going on. However, when it works well, it really is an amazing way of tuning, and to the point where I have with great success also tuned conventional single throttle, single plenum engines that are turbocharged using that method as well, because I do believe that it can actually provide some improvements in part throttle air fuel ratio control. So what did that all work out like on track for you? Is it working as you'd expect?
Yeah, I mean, so far, yeah, except that I think that we need to put it back to the dyno a bit. I think that when we did the dyno last time, we kind of just trying to nudge a bit, above the base boost pressure. So the idea now is to kind of the middle part right now. We just flew through that quite quickly in the dyno, and we have quite limited time on that. So I see that we have some issues with that now, kind of with the fuel film, and also with the blips on downshift is not really reacting perfectly, or I would say it's quite poorly. So that's something that we need to go back and touch on, so we kind of populate the whole table in a correct way. But I think what you explained is I couldn't put it in better words, and I guess that's why you are HP Academy. I'm not. So
I just try. I know that we gloss over a lot of complex topics as we're talking to guests on the podcast, and when I get something that I know a lot of people probably won't understand, I'll just take the time to try and explain it in as simple terms as I can, so that everyone's got a better understanding of what we're going on about here. I think what you've just mentioned there as well with the dyno, there's a certain amount of tuning we need to do on the dyno before we go to the track. There are always small differences I find though between what we see on the dyno and what we see on the racetrack. So I will also be doing some touch-ups to my calibration at the track, because here we're actually running under the real world conditions we're going to be operating in. The dyno, it's an exceptional tool and definitely the safest place to be doing our tuning, but it's also very difficult to replicate the airflow and temperatures that we're going to see on a racetrack at perhaps 200 kilometers an hour. So there's always an element of validation on the racetrack that's essential. In terms of, because you mentioned the downshift blip, so again with a paddle shifted transmission, we're not using the clutch when we're on track, we're not manually blipping the throttle to match RPM on the downshift. That's done by, in this case, the WTAK ECU. Were you able to do any calibration of that on the dyno? I'm not sure what type of dyno you were using.
No, we weren't, because we used the hub dyno. So then it's quite. I mean, you could. At least in my opinion, and to be honest, I'm still also kind of deep diving on your training courses that you have. So I'm very kind of not super knowledgeable about it. So I'm still learning. But I see that with kind of the mass that you have on the hub dynos, And especially also when you start to do it, like when you start to put the brakes on, then it doesn't really replicate the real world. So even if technically you could do an upshift, but it's going to be quite heavy on the shifting itself. So I think that when we have to run it in the hub dyno, we basically put it to the gear that's 1-to-1, and then we go a sweep from 2000 RPM and upwards. If I were to be able to get it into like a rolling road, then I think that would be easier to do it. But I haven't, at least my experience here is that it's not going to be super successful on a hub dyno.
No, I think you're absolutely spot on there. We started with a mainline rolling road dyno, and that was actually reasonably good for at least getting paddle shift or gear shifting in the ballpark, because it had a reasonable amount of inertia. And what I mean by this is, particularly if you're doing acceleration, run, and upshifting, when you upshift, there's a torque interrupt to the engine, and it's only momentary, but with the hub dyno, the lack of inertia, that'll actually clamp down and basically pull the RPM down very, very sharply, whereas the rolling road with a lot more inertia, it can't do that so quickly. So you can actually upshift and downshift on that with some success. I wouldn't say it's a perfect replication of what happens on the track, but it'll at least get you in the ballpark, so you can then go to the track and fine tune. Yeah, the hub dyno, I've tried it. It's pretty ugly.
Yeah. I think that also, to be honest, for me, at least with the WTAK, I haven't tried any others, but you have. But I think that the upshifts for me, that's the basic part, right? You could literally, if you had an ignition key in the car, you can just flip that when you do the shift, and that would kind of do it, right? So if you do it quite tight and you don't really give the time to kind of set the dogs and the teats against each other, then you can do some damage, of course. But if you are really like conservative on it, then it's good. But the downshifts are a bit more tricky because
you need to match the RPM, or you can do some damage.
Exactly.
I think with the upshifts as well, because these are a closed loop shift system, so what that means is it's actually monitoring the gear position, so it won't re-engage torque until the shift is actually deemed to be complete. So you're not going to be re-engaging torque halfway through the shift and tearing the dogs off inside the gearbox. So as long as you've got the maximum shift time sort of set very conservative, that's going to do exactly what it says on the label pretty much. With the downshift, I think there's a lot more complexities around this, because it's not just the blip parameters in your ECU. In order for it to be able to rev match quickly and cleanly, you've actually got to have your calibration right in the first place. So what I mean by this is you're going to need to have your transient enrichment, which in the WTAK case is fuel film, dialed in correctly. And also, if you're at closed throttle, you want to make sure that all of the cells that the engine's going to transition through in the fuel table as the throttle is blipped are also dialed in correctly. And that's something I see so many tuners don't do. They're lazy, I guess. They'll tune the thing at wide open throttle, they'll make sure it idles, and kind of the rest of it, close enough's good enough. But particularly when you're starting to get into these more complex installations with paddle shifted transmissions, close enough is actually not good enough. You really need to spend the time in that sort of low load area, part throttle, and make sure that every single cell is dialed in, and then the paddle shift, or the throttle blip is going to just be able to work perfectly.
I mean, I had it working on my previous car. I had it, and there was the same issue, but with the GPR package. And there I put some time in it, but I haven't had the time to do it here. But on the previous car, it was butter smooth. Like I remember once I was going on a track where it was kind of, full throttle, then going a little bit right downhill on a track in Norway. And then I remember I did downshifts in that. And that's kind of scary area where you're doing like over 200 kilometers an hour, full brake, and then you do downshifts. And I remember how butter smooth it was. I didn't even feel the downshifts. It was just rev matching nicely, and the car didn't unsettle at all. So as you say, I think that when I drive the M4 now, super rough, and I do like high RPM downshifts, you kind of get away with it. But then when you go a little bit slower speeds, then it's rough. So I think that's kind of the part I've been struggling with quite a lot. But I also haven't had really time to put the time into that. So, yeah, I mean, maybe I would just consult you, pay you some money for that analysis, and then it's all, I guess.
Just to be clear for everyone listening, consultancy, not a service that HPA offers.
Well, maybe after today.
I think most people don't sort of understand the implications of having these downshifts not dialed in correctly. Most people kind of assume that the danger here is damage to the gearbox, and that absolutely can happen. However, what you just mentioned there is the real issue on track, when maybe you're under blipping, and what that will end up doing is when you're hard under brakes and you're downshifting, the rear wheels are, as the torque is re-engaged, the rear wheels actually will sort of partially lock up as it sort of has to catch up to speed. So if you're under hard braking, particularly in a low traction situation, and your downshift blip is not sufficient, you can end up locking the rear wheels, and all of a sudden you're facing the wrong way and out in the kitty litter wondering what happened. So yeah, it's important to get these right.
It is. I agree. And I think that also, I mean, when you do, like, normally if you are on the limit, like, you shift a lot of the weight of the car to the front. So like, getting loss of traction on the rear is even easier, right? Yeah. So I think that's kind of something that's on my agenda to take care of as we go now for this year, because I think that that's kind of something that's in the back of my head and scratching quite a lot. So I think the downshifts, but I'm not going to touch the downshifts until we have it fully properly tuned. So I think that's the first stage in this.
Yeah, it all comes back to what I said before. You just cannot get that right if the calibration is not absolutely on point. All right, one of the questions I'm pretty sure that I asked you last time we had you on the podcast was, will we see this car at World Time Attack in Australia at any point? Now, obviously, it's been a bit of a rough road since we talked to you last. Assuming 2025 is, in fact, your year, what's the chances is that on your radar at all?
I mean, to be honest, I think it's a cool event. And in the end, I have been working with a lot of companies from Australia. Like, back in the days, I worked with Haltech quite a lot. Now it's, Motec and Albins, and many of these companies are over there. So it would be super natural to bring the car there. But I think that I have been talking with Ian, who drives World Time Attack. I think they need to do small changes to accommodate my car. But I think that talking about this 3 years ago, then it was not so essential to talk about. But I kind of see that it's shifting more and more against that, towards that, basically. So I think that kind of allowing a tube frame car, which mine is, I don't believe it's far-fetched. I think they might do something with that. I haven't heard. I heard some rumors that something will change, but I haven't actually heard if it changed.
Yeah, I did. As I was asking that, I kind of had glossed over the fact that there are some pretty stringent rules on what can and can't compete at World Time Attack. And yeah, as you mentioned, I think tube chassis at the moment, I can't remember off the top of my head the rules, but I don't think it'd fit in. Having said that, Rodin cars ran something that was tube framed last year.
Yeah, and I think if we look at like one of the most popular one, the Porsche, the RP, I mean, it's, yes, okay, it has some sort of bottom plate of a car, but I mean, it's not super far away from my car in the end. So it's,
no.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool car, but I think that, if I would bring my car, I think they wouldn't be intimidated. I think they would like the challenge in that. I don't think they would be like, oh, wait, that's not correct.
For sure. It's a tough one, because obviously you don't want to disadvantage competitors that have built their car to the current rule book, and then all of a sudden something like your car turns up that's outside the rules and on paper could have a significant competitive advantage. But the flip side of this, I think, as time goes on and these cars are becoming more and more expensive to build to be at the pointy end of the field, they're going to need to maybe accommodate ways of encouraging more and more competitors to get involved. Otherwise, I fear that we're going to see, particularly at the top end of the field, I think we're going to see a smaller field of cars entering, which would be obviously a big negative for the whole sport. But time will tell, and fortunately I am not the one who has to make the rules.
No, and I think for this year, I think we, as I said, it's gonna make it or break it, so we need the car to go fast. I have actually, last year we did a track where we actually managed to succeed quite a good lap time compared to what I did before. So there's a small track not far away from me where my personal best previously was with the E90 M3, which had some 800 horsepowers. And I did like a 1095 with that car. Now we actually brought the M4, because we had some issues with the sound. We got the black flag. We did like a quicker cool down lap, basically, but I was still letting cars by. And with that, I did a 185. So basically a second quicker than the M3. So it's going in the good direction, but still this time is probably like 8 seconds away from the quickest cars there. So it's still...
You still got work to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. All right, Karel, I think we'll move towards wrapping this up. And to do so, we've got the same 3 questions that I asked you last time. We'll see if anything's changed. So the first is, what's next in the future for you? I'm guessing more 60-hour weeks plus 60 hours working on a car?
Yeah, so as I said, I started a new work employment end of last year. So that's kind of, I'm getting into that. It's quite a lot. And I even might visit, Australia and New Zealand because of that work. But I think the main focus right now is to get the car dialed in and consistently getting laps out of it. I think that it doesn't need to be record-breaking laps right now. It just needs to be 10 laps without headaches. And when we get that, then the lap times will come. So I think that's kind of the super main focus this year. Nothing else. No fancy bits and pieces added to the car or changing anything. Just as is, and then get the kilometers out of the car, basically.
I think your trajectory really closely resembles where we've been with our SR86. I mean, we love technology. We get access to all the new toys, and it's really tempting to continue to iterate the car. But at some point, you just actually have to get some laps in so you can develop it and improve the car and your driving. So I think that's definitely a smart move. Easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah, I agree. And just to, put a little bit more more fuel on the fire, I have actually started in the background designing a new engine.
Wow. Okay.
And it's going to be shortly it's going to be the V8, the S65 that I have, but just a 4-cylinder with one of the heads from the V8.
Okay.
By that, we will probably cut some 150 kilograms of the engine package.
Without sort of trying to add another half an hour to this podcast, I can't just leave that alone. Obviously, the weight saving goes without saying. That's massive in a package that's sort of circa 1,200 kilograms total at the moment. Clearly, it's going to be difficult to make the same sort of 1,200 horsepower target with a 4-cylinder. Not impossible. There's definitely ones out there that can do it. But the other problem when you're dealing with 4 cylinders, it's difficult to get capacity into the engine that then is going to allow you to run a big enough turbo to make 1,200 horsepower while retaining a wide enough power band. You sort of get into the situation of my old drag car, which made 1,200 plus horsepower, but did so over a 1,500 RPM rev range and didn't really make useful power until it was as sort of 8,500 RPM. So give us a quick rundown on how you plan to deal with that.
So I think that in the end, it's kind of also based on the data that I've been looking at, because the way the gearbox is set up right now, the shifts, between the gearings on the shifts, it's not a big window there. Like it's not multiple thousands of RPMs. So because we are doing like 120 kilometers on first gear, then most of it will be quite tight going up to 6th gear. So with that, I'm not utilizing the V8 in that perspective, because it's good. We have a good bottom on the engine, but because we will always...
So you don't actually need that low RPM torque, and you're not utilizing that with the close ratio gearbox.
Exactly. No, it's basically, when we look at the track, it's very few times that we are below 5,000 RPM. So I think that with the ideas that I have with this would be that it would be a 2.5 liter billet block. And I have already kind of dissected the S50 billet block to a 4-cylinder, but then there's a bit different spacing between the cylinders. So in the end, the idea is not to reinvent too much of the wheel, probably try to find a crank that has that cylinder spacing. Probably it's going to end up with some sort of Volvo crank or something, and then use the head as is, just make new cams that accommodate basically a half an engine with the lobes. And kind of that's it. I don't think it needs to be more difficult than that. But also, I'm a guy that built a car from a toy car, so maybe I'm...
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that that still sounds plenty difficult, but I'm here for the ride. I'd like to see how that comes to fruition, but let's get this one dialed in 100% first.
Yeah. And this is a side project that I'm working on when I'm bored, so it's not something that's happening now.
When you're bored, I like that.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of part of that. Hey, if this S65 blew up tomorrow, what would be Plan B? So it's not really super far-fetched, because having a Plan B, even if the worst case doesn't happen, isn't that bad. So I kind of always want to, okay, we have it now, it works, but what if someone pushes me down the lake, how am I going to fix this? So it's kind of part of that ideas as well. I don't want to be caught off guard when the engine blows up and I need to find a new engine block, and that's super difficult nowadays. So
Oh, I think it's also an element of how, driven people's minds work. You're always sort of, well, what's the next thing? What's the next big thing? You can't kind of sit still. It's always iterating, always sort of engineering, always making changes. All right, next question. Is there any advice you'd give to a younger version of yourself to help reach where you are today in your career faster?
Yeah, I think that has changed since we talked last time. First of all, I would say don't build an M4 out of a toy car. That's a certain. No, but I think that it still kind of comes back to, I think, what we talked about last time in the end, that getting a bit ready before jumping into something. Because like when you build cars and you estimate it's going to cost you $1,000 to build this car, it's always going to be the double or the triple. And that's, I mean, it's always going to be like that. So I think getting more prepared into things would be a sure benefit today. And I think kind of also, if I were to maybe put more hours into my normal work and climb in some positions and maybe get a little bit more salaries, then I can also outsource some of the parts here more. So I think maybe that could be a thing as well, I think, because now it's been kind of not super high salary, but then working my butt off to get the stuff done that I want to have done.
Sort of got to be one or the other, realistically.
I think so, yeah. And it's I think that I'm trying to juggle both of them right now, and I had to sacrifice, relationships and not like weekends, Christmases, like all of that. That's out of the window. Like, on this last Christmas, I was in the workshop eating Big Macs and working on the car. So it's not like a lot of people think that, oh wow, that's so nice, but I think that it comes so much negatives with that. So I think as you say, you need to choose one or the other in the end.
Yeah, and I think trying to keep some form of balance is important, probably not least of all for mental health. I'll add another question in here, sort of as a side to this one, in kind of like what I said right at the start of this. Have you got any tips on how to keep your motivation on a project that has run now so many years? It's really easy when you start a new project to set off and all guns blazing, you're excited, you're driven and you're motivated. But as time drags on and the light at the end of the tunnel is still very, very dim, that motivation can easily wane. So yeah, any tips on motivation?
Yeah, I think this is kind of probably the thing that I have kind of a black belt in, because to be honest, it's been so many times that I kind of come home from work and I need to go to the workshop. I have grab some food and I literally want to cry in the couch and say, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm so done with this. And this is going to sound super strange, but I'm not getting pushed by people embracing the car and giving me the positives. So when people say, hey, wow, that's a really cool car, then I'm thinking, oh yeah, but this is not perfect, and that's not perfect, that's not good. So for me, it's been kind of, when people saying, hey, it's not going to get finished, why it's taking so long, that's kind of the fire for me. I want to prove that, okay, let me
prove the haters wrong.
Exactly. So I think that's kind of been the driving force for me. In the end, also, accomplishing something that you set your goal on, even if the goal is like far-fetched, super far away, like try to go there, like do 80% of that, because the reward in the end is going to be so massive. And I see that with the car now. When we start to drive it, I can drive it, like even if it's stressful. Like the last test we did with the car, I was loading the car 2 a.m, and then 4 a.m, same day, I was driving it to the track without any sleep. So it's rough, but then after that, when you go home and you kind of see what you've done, you see the video driving, you get the feeling, then it's a really nice feeling that you get from this. And I think those rewards are actually the negative, proving the negatives wrong, and also the positives from driving and getting the hours in. I think that's in the end something that drives me in this.
I think no matter how much money you've got, how much time you've got, or what resources you've got access to build a car at the level that you've done is always going to require sacrifice. And I think it's just being prepared. Or are you prepared for that sacrifice? And quite clearly you are. All right, Karel, last question for today. If people want to follow you and see what you're up to, how are they best to do so?
So there are multiple medias. During the winter, we did some Twitch streaming directly from my workshop with like 7 cameras. So that's one thing, but it's on pause now. But I would say Instagram is probably the best. And also when kind of the storm has quieted a little bit more, we will pick up the pace on the YouTube vlogs and where we kind of document and get people to follow along. So I think the YouTube part is something where it's Karel S Motorsport, and on Instagram it's the same. It's KS Motorsport or Karel S Motorsport. So I think YouTube and Instagram are good.
All right. Well, as always, those links will be in the show notes so people can find it really easily. And if you haven't seen this car before, I highly recommend you jump on Karel's Instagram, because it is an absolute work of art and a credit to you. So great to hear the real side of building a car at this level. It's not all sort of rainbows and unicorns. There are always going to be hurdles along the way, and I don't think your project is any different to anyone else's. So great to get a bit more insight into what's been going on over the last sort of couple of years, and we do genuinely wish you all the best for 2025. I can't wait to see this thing out there reliably smashing lap records. So good luck with all of that.
Thank you very much. And you guys will be the first to get some good videos when we actually do something good. So then I love the podcast, and I think, keep on what you're doing, especially also with the Academy stuff. It's amazing. So thank you so much.
Thanks. We appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Tuned In, and don't forget, by using the code podcast500 at checkout, podcast listeners can get a huge $500 off our VIP package, which includes over 40 current courses, as well as a long list of courses to be released in the future. As a VIP, you'll also get lifetime access to our members-only webinars and our community forum. Lastly, we'd love it if you could drop a review on your chosen podcasting platform. These reviews really help us to grow our audience, and that in turn helps us to continue to get more high quality guests. To say thanks, each week we'll be picking a random reviewer and sending them out an HPA t-shirt free of charge anywhere in the world. This is also a great place to ask any questions you might have too, and I'll do my best to answer them if your review gets picked. So this week, a big shout out to Grant from Florida, who has said one of the best free resources out there. Finally caught up on the full back catalogue of episodes. It's crazy how much information is included in here for free. Well, it's great to hear that you are getting value out of the podcast, and if you get in touch with your t-shirt size and shipping details, we'll get a fresh tee shipped right out to you. All right, that concludes our interview, and before we sign off, I just wanted to mention, for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school, and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.